Takshashila's 2025 China Challenge Survey is your opportunity to have a say in how India approaches China today and in the years to come. So zoom out, weigh in, and make your voice heard. Take the survey today. Link in description.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the All Things Policy podcast. I, Arindam Goswami, am your host for today. I work as a research analyst at the Takshashila Institution in the High-Tech Geopolitics program. Today's episode is going to be a very interesting discussion. On September 17th, the world witnessed what might turn out to be either one of the most consequential defense agreements since NATO's founding, or might fizzle out as something that's not as disruptive as it might seem. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia didn't just sign a mutual defense pact, they potentially rewrote the rules of nuclear deterrence, economic diplomacy, and regional power projection in one stroke. For the first time in history, probably, a nuclear armed state has formally pledged its atomic arsenal to defend a non-nuclear oil superpower. But this isn't just about military hardware or traditional alliances. We are looking at the birth of nuclear arbitrage, possibly, where atomic weapons become a tradable commodity. We are seeing the emergence of what we might call reverse petrodollars, where military assets back financial flows instead of oil. The implications cascade far beyond the Middle East. India's $100 billion economic partnership with Saudi Arabia now sits uncomfortably alongside Riyadh's new nuclear patron. China's Belt and Road investments suddenly have Pakistani nuclear protection. Iran faces the prospect of a Sunni nuclear umbrella stretching from Islamabad to the Arabian Peninsula. Today, we are asking the questions that traditional geopolitical analysis misses. What happens when sovereign wealth funds start buying military power directly? Can the nuclear non-proliferation regime survive when deterrence becomes a rental service? And are we witnessing the birth of the world's first religiously defined nuclear bloc? This isn't just another defense deal. This is the moment when 20th century assumptions about money, military power, and atomic weapons collided with 21st century realities. Welcome to the new great game. And to discuss all this with me today, I have as my guest Yusuf Unjawala, a mechanical engineer by qualification and a businessman by profession. Yusuf is an adjunct scholar at Takshashila. He has taken a keen interest in defense, geopolitics, and strategic affairs, and I'm sure he will have a lot to offer on these important questions of today. So, yeah, welcome, Yusuf. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Arun. Great to be here with you today.
Yeah, so maybe we can just start with you outlining what is the exact defense agreement, what sort of details have come out in the public domain about the defense agreement. I believe the actual text is not yet out, but whatever details we have around it, just the factual parts, maybe that will help to just get this started with.
So, Arindam, what they said is the statement which was out. So that's the first reference point that we have where they said they have entered into a mutual defense agreement. They use the word agreement, not a treaty. So I think it matters. So it's a mutual defense agreement where it is to form deterrence from external threats. And this comes soon after Israeli attack on Qatar. When they targeted Hamas in Doha. There are multiple strikes. So the timing is something which people are linking, and perhaps it's true. Maybe these things don't happen overnight. It may be in the works, and perhaps it was in the works. But probably the Israeli attack just speeded up everything, and they had to come out overtly and declare. That's the reason probably why the text is not yet public. They may still be working on the finer points of the text, but they have a broader concurrence that such an agreement is required, and they needed to announce it so that that itself has some kind of an effect or has some kind of value. So that's the first thing. So on the day of the signing of agreement, they announced that this such and such an agreement, and that is going to be for mutual defense and for deterrence. And when you use the word deterrence, and especially when one of the parties is a nuclear weapons state, then you obviously bring in the nuclear angle in that. Now, the two things have happened, where the Pakistani defense minister went out to say that the nuclear umbrella is involved, and then later on, it was backtracked. Once, the Pakistanis understood that, saying something like this carries a lot of weight, a lot of meaning, and then will also invite reactions, negative reactions from people who would be watching this very closely and getting impacted by this agreement. So Pakistanis have backtracked a bit on that, and to assuage maybe any kind of fears that would come around from that. But nobody's going to buy that, right? The statements have been made. In the first statement itself, they said it is for deterrence. So we will assume that this is a nuclear umbrella being extended by Pakistan to Saudi Arabia. Nobody, needs reminding that the Saudis funded Pakistani nuclear bomb when you're trying to acquire it. And nobody is also under an illusion that the Pakistani nuclear weapon is at the beck and call of the Saudis. I mean, Pakistan is not going to deny Saudi Arabia if Saudi Arabia says, we want a few warheads from you. Pakistani will just not be able to deny that. So this is where things stand. Uh, and how countries will react, we'll have to see how some of the major powers will react. We don't have a reaction from China. We don't have a reaction from the US. India has said that we will study, and we also hope that Saudi Arabia will take into account India's sensitivities and India and mutual interests. This is where things stand.
Right, right. So there are two things that you mentioned here, which probably I would like to double click on. The first is the nuclear point, but before that, you also gave a little bit of background about the relations between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, especially in the nuclear domain. So in general, if you could, for the benefit of our listeners, give a little bit of background to the Pakistan-Saudi Arabia relationship, how Saudi Arabia has relations with its neighbors in West Asia, what is the US involvement in Saudi Arabia and in West Asia, the base that it has in Qatar, and in the run up to this agreement, what all could have contributed to Saudi Arabia and Pakistan taking this step. So if you could give a little more background to this entire drama, and what could have been the events that triggered this. Yeah.
So we'll start with your last question first, right? What is the context behind this, and what events could have triggered it? So the very immediate event is probably Israel's attack on Qatar. Now, for decades, the US has guaranteed security of all the Gulf countries. It be Qatar, where it has a large air base, Bahrain, where its navy is based, Saudi Arabia is under US protection, UAE, even Egypt. So all these countries have depended on the US for its security. But in the last few months, we have seen Iran attacking Qatar, and there was no reaction from the US in terms of any defensive kind of a step. And similarly, now Israel and the statement from the US was, Israel shouldn't have done this, but then targeting Hamas was worth it. So that does not kind of send any good feelings about the US coming to defense of its partners. So that message has gone out. So that is the context, where all these Gulf countries depended on the US for its security, and now there is no trust, or the trust, even if there is a bit of a trust, it's a lot down on the metric scale. So because they still depend on the weapons the US will provide, so they can't fully break away from it. They will depend on the US for a lot of the weaponry, but as far as coming to their defense is concerned, that does not exist anymore. I mean, they don't trust that. So this is where perhaps the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan comes in. There's a background of it. There are probably indications that more states might join this agreement, and then it becomes a larger kind of a regional group, and that will perhaps be seen as an Islamic NATO. Maybe it's already been seen as the building blocks of an Islamic NATO, and perhaps it'd be Sunni Islamic NATO. I don't think Iran is going to be into this thing. Although, if you remember, when Israel attacked Iran, one of the generals came out and said, the Pakistanis would lob nukes at Israel if Israel did anything on Iran. That was kind of saying that Pakistan has extended its nuclear umbrella to Iran, which was perhaps a bit of a stretch. But I mean, the statement was made, and there would have been some reasons for the general to say that. We don't know what's been working in the background, but Pakistan-Iran relations also are, although they call themselves brotherly, but they too have exchanged missiles on each other not too long ago. So there is a lot of things happening over there. Primarily, they would say that the Saudis will be targeting Iran in this. Their deterrence is against Iran, but perhaps it's more likely that it's also against any such acts as Israel did on Doha, on Saudi territory, and perhaps that's the reason why they have gotten. So we talked about what is the past. You asked me about what is the past, Saudi-Pakistan cooperation like. Forever, Saudi has been bankrolling Pakistan. Even right now, I think there is about a $3 billion loan which the Saudis have extended to Pakistan, as Pakistan is perennially under balance of payment crisis, and that is why Pakistan is beholden to the Saudis. I mean, they are at their beck and call. In the past, the Pakistanis have sent troops to Saudi Arabia for their protection. Even now, former Pakistani Army Chief Rahil Sharif is in Saudi Arabia. Nothing much is done or said, heard about what he's up to, but that was an operational kind of a thing where they are looking at some role for the general over there, and now we may see that coming to fruition in some way. Perhaps Pakistani troops being sent to Saudi Arabia, maybe a brigade level force or something like that, or maybe a bigger one. We don't know. But their defense ties in this regard go back a long way. And economic ties, obviously, the Saudis have been bankrolling Pakistan for a long time. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the Saudis have funded the Pakistani nuclear weapons program.
Right, right. You touched upon an important point here regarding the sectarian nature of these coalitions, or what seems to be building up to be a sectarian coalition. The Islamic NATO party you talked about, right? So, could this Sunni majority alliance prompt Iran to formalize similar nuclear sharing arrangements with, say, some Shia majority countries through militias, or the Alawite-led Syria? Does this essentially create competing sectarian nuclear umbrellas, which will then go on to fragment the Middle East into religiously defined nuclear blocks, maybe for the first time in history, right, in terms of the nuclear ability, right? And if this agreement sets a precedent for an Islamic NATO-style collective security bloc, it could possibly embolden pan-Islamic coalitions against other perceived external adversaries, like maybe Israel or India, right? So, what could be the consequences, not just for the West Asian region, but also for India's interests and India's non-proliferation efforts and diplomatic balancing efforts?
So, first of all, there's not going to be at least still, Iran does not acquire its own nuclear weapons and goes overt about it and conducts tests. There's not going to be a Shia nuclear bomb. Right now, there is a so-called Islamic bomb, which is in the hands of Pakistan. And it is a Sunni majority country where the Shias are not treated well in that country. That we'll not get into the sectarian aspects of those and what is what in that regard. We'll just stick to this topic. So anyway, the Pakistani bomb is an Islamic bomb, and it's perhaps a Sunni bomb, and that's what the Saudis see it as, because the Saudis funded it. So if any such grouping comes, it will be seen as a Sunni Islamic NATO. I don't think Iran is going to be part of it, although Iran has officially, from the podium at the UN General Assembly, the Iranian president has welcomed the Saudi-Pakistan agreement, which is very surprising, given that the primary deterrence the Saudis need is against Iran. I mean, they have a history of what Iran has done to the Saudis in the past. So that would be the primary deterrence. Israel has not threatened Saudi Arabia in any manner so far. A lot of things are at play over here. So it still remains, it will be seen as a Sunni Islamic bloc if it extends to a bloc where you have, say, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE joining in. How India will see this? Obviously, India has reacted in a very cautious way and perhaps in a negative way because we have asked the Saudis to be mindful of our interest. So we see this bloc negatively. And the reason is Pakistan would be emboldened by this. First of all, this treaty is going to be, perhaps, in my opinion, is going to be a one-way thing, right? Where it's Pakistan which comes to the defense of the Saudis. It's not as if, the Saudis will send troops and equipment to fight India if there is a war between India and Pakistan. I don't think that is going to happen. India's concern is largely going to be the funding which will come from Saudi Arabia to Pakistan. Now, Pakistan can use this to continue its terror campaign against India and probably, increase the scope and scale of it because of the funding, and also because knowing that the Saudis are now in an agreement with them for mutual defense. So it may embolden them. Secondly, what could happen is Saudi funding weapons purchases of Pakistan and perhaps American weapons purchases. Pakistan over the last few years has gotten heavily dependent on Chinese weaponry, and they are not too happy about it because Chinese weaponry is not as great as the American weapons, and Pakistan is used to good American weapons in the past, right? I mean, the F-16s perhaps is their crown jewel as far as their armed forces go, and but those are very old, and Americans did not abide by their agreement to supply more F-16s once the sanctions were hit. So Pakistan's today armed forces is about 80 odd plus percent Chinese weaponry. It's the largest buyer of Chinese weaponry. 50% of Chinese weapons export go to Pakistan today. So Pakistan will be happy to get some American weapons now, and even the Pakistani-U.S. relations suddenly with Trump in power has dramatically improved from being shunned by the U.S. and kind of become untouchable in some way. Suddenly their stock is up in Washington, especially in White House. So this could embolden Pakistan, and then India would be the target of their nefarious activities. And this is our concern.
Right, right. So there are 3 points that you touched about. One is the nuclear question, then there's the economic issue, and India's interest also. So let's dig a little deeper into the nuclear question here. So although it's not very clear whether I mean, you mentioned that has offered to make its nuclear program available to Saudi Arabia. Now, does that create a dangerous precedent for nuclear arbitrage, like where non-nuclear states are now essentially renting nuclear deterrence from nuclear powers, and that fundamentally undermines the other non-proliferation regimes, right? Like NPT and others, and it creates a new model of proliferation, which then bypasses traditional controls. So,
No, how? For instance, the U.S. has extended its nuclear umbrella over all its allies. So there is the precedent is there, right? I mean, there's nothing about the precedent not being there. How different is it? I mean, we'll not talk about the capability of Pakistan to extend that one, but the precedent is there where the U.S. Nuclear umbrella worked for all its allies. So that precedent was so despite NPT, despite everything. I mean, the entire British nuclear deterrent is based on American missiles, right? So despite MTCR, despite NPT, today, the UK relies on Trident missiles for its deterrence. So the precedent is there. Can Pakistan provide extended nuclear deterrence? I said no. I mean, it does not have any capability to do so. First of all, it does not have a large arsenal. It has been developing long-range missiles, which is of concern for the US itself. I mean, the US earlier, I think last days of Biden administration sanctioned Pakistan for developing long-range missiles because the US thinks that a nuclear-armed Pakistan with long-range missiles for which it has absolutely no use, because primarily it just says that its nuclear weapons is to deter India. But then why is it developing a very, very long-range missile? So the US sanctioned Pakistan because of that. But yet, Pakistan does not have the capability, obviously, I mean, it's nowhere in the picture when it comes to the capabilities the US has in extended deterrence to all its allies. But something has happened, right? I mean, this is a break. Can they do it in the way the US provided? No. Perhaps it'll be a nuclear blackmail kind of a scenario where, all the countries who are using Pakistani nukes as a deterrent will just use it as a blackmail that, what, we may not have nukes, but we have it in this manner. The purpose, perhaps, for Saudi would be to deter Iran and Israel.
So as you said, whether Pakistan actually extends it or uses this nuclear deterrence for the benefit of Saudi Arabia is something that's up for debates. But does it somehow? I mean, could the perception itself accelerate nuclear proliferation risks? Right? Can it spark a regional nuclear arms race, or maybe force Israel and Iran to reconsider their own nuclear strategies?
I mean, we all know, for all practical purposes, Israel has a very,
Okay.
it's the only nuclear armed state in West Asia. So, I mean, they don't confirm or deny that's their position, but they do have nuclear weapons. That's one. Secondly, Pakistan extending nuclear deterrence to Saudi Arabia, well, may stop Saudis from acquiring nuclear weapons, maybe, instead of them going nuclear. Because the Saudis have said that if Iran acquires nuclear weapons, they will go for it as well. Which perhaps will still be the case. If Iran acquires nuclear weapons, then Saudi will look to acquire nuclear weapons. But in terms of NPT, I mean, we can say for all practical purpose, NPT is on its last legs because the US treaty allies itself don't trust the nuclear umbrella of the United States. Japan is considering it. I mean, there is a large majority of people in Japan and South Korea as well who are very much in favor of going, acquiring nuclear weapons. And once that happens, there'll be other countries, and some of the countries are very advanced nuclear powers. Their civilian nuclear setup is really very good, and they have all the building blocks necessary for making nuclear weapons. Japan and South Korea, especially. So that will be a game over for NPT. I mean, this has been happening for a long time, over the last 5 years, since Trump 1.0. I mean, Trump himself has gone on record to say, no, Japan should acquire its own nuclear weapons, also South Korea as well, and that will be good. I don't think anybody trusts the nuclear security guarantees anymore. And we will see more nuclear weapons state. And this has nothing to do with Saudi-Pakistan agreement.
Right, right. Now, moving from this to the economic aspect of this entire agreement, right, or the consequences of it, right. So, considering that Saudi Arabia has a good relationship with India from all perspectives, right, economic as well, and given that this agreement formally then introduces the only Muslim majority nuclear power into Gulf economic dynamics and security dynamics, now Saudi Arabia will face an impossible choice between its economic relationship with India, like $100 billion plus economic partnership that it has with India, including the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, etc., etc., and its new military and economic alliance with Pakistan, right? So it sort of forces a fundamental realignment of Saudi Arabia's economic strategy, also, right? Will Saudi Arabia's now whatever planned multi-billion-dollar investments in Pakistan's defense industrial complex and infrastructure, I'm assuming, wouldn't that create new economic corridors? Then that counters India's plans, India's long-term connectivity ambitions, etc. And how does this then impact India-Saudi Arabia relations, right? Riyadh's closer military and nuclear alignment with Islamabad does actually complicate India's energy investment and remittance flows also with Saudi Arabia, right? So, although Saudi Arabia has assured that it will balance both relationships, but where do you see the strains, catching up in India-Saudi Arabia relationship?
Beyond Saudi Arabia extending loans to Pakistan, we haven't seen any real investment by Saudi Arabia in Pakistan, and that remains to be seen. And we have seen from the Chinese example that there are no returns on investment in Pakistan when it comes to economic returns. Right? You can buy Pakistan as a client state. That's all you can do with the money, but there are no returns. And the Saudis are desperate to diversify their economy away from the oil, which oil-based, petrodollars, if you want to call it, towards something which is more sustainable once the petrodollars dry up. And that's not going to be in the future. So they have been working in this regard, and India is a very important partner for them in diversifying their sources of generating revenue for the economy. IMEC is very important for them as well. Are they going to invest in any corridor in Pakistan? For what? I mean, China, for them, the CPEC was all about getting access to the sea, pumping oil from Gwadar into to Xinjiang, and things like that. But what corridor would Saudi Arabia invest into, and why? So we don't know. I don't think there is any economic viability for Saudi Arabia to do anything of that sort. They'll only just throw more money into Pakistan. That's it. And that is a concern India has, right? Any free money that comes into Pakistan, which will be used to buy weapons and fund terror against India. That is our concern. And that we will have to engage with Saudis and make sure that that does not happen. Or how we can just minimize the kind of money that Saudis put into Pakistan. That is going to be our concern.
Right. So, considering that this is a big problem for India, India's response has been uncharacteristically muted to some extent, right? I mean, we have said something in response, but do you think India needs to do a lot more when it comes to talking about this agreement with the Saudis, and it is very important for India's defense requirements also, right? I mean, how do we tackle that, and what other?
Let me put it this way, if I can, because since you talked about what you get, we have to take ourselves seriously as a big country. Forever we have been saying that we are the net security provider, or now we use the word the preferred security partner. The world as we see right now is in a very chaotic condition. It's in a very dangerous condition right now. Anything can happen. There are two wars raging right now. There have been short wars, India and Pakistan, Israel, Iran. All kinds of things are happening, and nobody trusts the US to do anything. It has withdrawn in that regard, and therefore India has to see how it can engage with its extended neighborhood to maintain peace. How India can be that force of assurance when it comes to security and stability of the regions, which is in our extended neighborhood. That we'll have to think about. Do we have the capability to extend, security guarantees? I don't think so. But how do we increase our defense engagement with all these countries, be it West Asia or be it Southeast Asia, right? Otherwise, our security will be impacted because all these countries which feel threatened are going to take some steps. And some of those steps, like we've seen with the Saudi Pakistan agreement, will be against our interests. So I think the answer for us is to deepen our engagement with West Asia and see what kind of a defense understanding we can come with them. Remember, in 2008, India signed a defense agreement with Qatar, and at that time it was said it just falls short of India providing security guarantees to Qatar. This is 2008. And you're in 2025, we have far bigger economy, we have perhaps a better defense power, and we'll have to take certain steps to reassure the entire region that India, as a big country of this region, will be there as a force of stability. We'll have to work very hard in that regard. Otherwise, these agreements like these are going to be against our interest. It's in our interest now to think about such things.
But how far can India go in such defense, engagements? Considering that such a deal, Saudi Arabia could have also explored with China, but China hasn't wanted to, entangle itself into the West Asia issues, right? In with direct involvement, right? I mean, defense supplies and all fine, but defend actual boots on the ground and all of that sort of engagement is something that even China has stayed away from, right? In the US also probably wants to stay away from from that region. So what more could India do without harming its own interests, right? Stretching its own defense forces, its own economy, right? What would be the benefits of doing this versus the costs that could entail from such an engagement?
See, you mentioned the US is no, the US is very much there. It's still there, but it's stretched, and Trump is not interested. So that is where this agreement comes from, because Trump has indicated that he's not interested in going around and fighting wars, and people have just assumed that he's not going to come to their defense. Under him, the US is not going to come under to anybody's defense, and perhaps that will just have everybody thinking that their defense cannot be held hostage to the election cycle in the US. So if there is a Democratic administration which will come back and try to reinforce its alliances and say, no, we are there for you, and then the Republicans come and then they say that, sorry, you're on your own. So nobody is going to, go through that kind of a cycle. They're going to take steps in that regard. And this is why the Saudi Pakistan agreement. Now, China, you mentioned that China will supply weapons. China, like India, does not want to get into any kind of mutual defense agreements. It is their averseness. India's averseness to mutual defense. And perhaps I would say that, right. I mean, you don't want to go fight someone else's wars. But then countries like Pakistan would say that they're okay with it because all they need is money. They're like a mercenary country, right? I mean, the entire state they have been there in the past. In fact, the Pakistanis have killed Palestinians, if you remember, when they were deployed in Jordan many decades ago. So they are a mercenary force, and they don't mind doing this. But for India, there are consequences, and we'll have to think hard about extending security umbrella, right? So short of that, short of treaty alliances of mutual defense, how can we deepen our engagement so that all these countries feel assured? And how India can play a great role. India has ties with both Israel and Iran. Although our ties with Iran go up and down, but still we are able to engage with both these countries. And these two countries perhaps are the primary targets of any defense agreement or any Islamic bloc coming up over in West Asia after the Pakistan-Saudi deal, right? How can we play a role in making sure that we play a larger role in the West Asian region, talking with Israel, talking with Iran, and obviously all the Arab states, and make sure there is peace. Nobody's having territorial ambitions. Nobody is going and bombing each countries. I mean, can we do something like that? We don't have that leverage, but can we engage? And what kind of defense partnerships can we have in terms of interoperability, in terms of humanitarian assistance and things like that, and just to make them feel assured that India is there as a large power in this region, and as a force of good, as a force of stability, short of any mutual defense agreement. But if there is mutual agreement, defense agreement, which is what they seek, then India is not going to offer that. But even the sanctity of this Saudi Pak agreement, in terms of it being a collective defense agreement, even if there is a larger collective defense agreement, I mean, I don't think these countries are really equipped to fight. I mean, if we've seen the Saudi shortcoming in just taking on a ragtag militia at that time as what the Houthis, the Saudis failed. The Saudi and the UAE together attacked the Houthis, and they couldn't do anything. And today, Houthis are very much in power over there, and they have been terrorizing the shipping in the Red Sea. So that shows their limitation. So even if a larger a block comes up, their ability as a collective to fight a war is up for question. From India's point of view, it's not the defense, collective defense over there. It is the funding which will go to Pakistan, which emboldens it against India. That is our primary concern, not any kind of a collective defense agreement within the West Asian region.
Right, right. I understand that Saudi Arabia coming to Pakistan's help militarily is probably a wrong conclusion to draw here. But what if this agreement forces Saudi Arabia to even make the right noises in favor of Pakistan diplomatically in case of a conflict between India and Pakistan? Like we saw, for example, during Operation Sindoor from maybe Turkey or some other countries, right? Does that have a diplomatic disadvantage for India in such conflicts?
It remains to be seen. For a long time now, as India and Saudi relations improved, the tone and of Saudis, especially when it comes to Kashmir, has been a lot better in our favor as against it was earlier. How it will change now remains to be seen. What they say now on Kashmir, for instance, that perhaps would be a kind of a marker for us to see how Saudi is balancing its agreement, defense agreement with Pakistan, and their relations with India. Perhaps that will be a big marker. Would their approach on Kashmir?
Right, right. Now, there's one aspect of this whole thing that's very important, right? The China-US strategic triangulation also, right? So, for example, Pakistan is China's closest ally, and Saudi Arabia also probably wants to try and balance US-China relations with itself. So, could this defense pact like inadvertently create scenarios where Pakistan's nuclear weapons, theoretically, maybe not actually impractically, but theoretically, it could end up providing a veneer of protection to Chinese Belt and Road investments, maybe in Saudi Arabia, or some sort of investments in Saudi Arabia, which then effectively forces the US to choose between confronting Chinese economic expansion or, on the other hand, risking nuclear escalation, right? So, does this reshape the traditional security architecture of West Asia, especially in terms of reducing reliance on US guarantees and opening the door for China and Russia to expand their influence in this region?
No, I don't think nuclear weapons are for all that. I don't read it that way. I think it's, first of all, the text of this agreement is not out yet, and the ramifications. Which are the other countries? When will they announce joining? Right. Once they join, then we have to start to think what about our relations with the UAE, which is our largest trading partner in that region. And importantly, we have about 6 or 8 crore of our people living in the region. So that region is very important for us. So it remains to be seen. But I don't think that Chinese angle in terms of their BRI investments in Saudi Arabia and in any requirement for or nuclear protection over them, I don't think that is required. That I don't think that's the right way to read it. How China is, I mean, China has been mum. They haven't said anything yet about this deal. The US as well. So I think we need to see the text and if this expands into anything. And if it expands into a larger group, which will be seen as an Islamic NATO, then there might be negative consequences for them because, the whole civilizational kind of a thing, right? Where, then there is a Christian world and which has its NATO, and then there is Islamic world which has its own version of a collective defense, and how that leads to some kind of tensions. We don't know, and then there will be inadvertent consequences, negative consequences for such a group. So these countries will be mindful of it before forming a collective group. And therefore, how will China then play a role in that? And they would probably want to stay away from it.
Right. We've talked about it and you alluded to it a bit, but do you see these sorts of agreements leading to a change in how nuclear deterrence is talked about, at least at the global level? I mean, you have groups being formed around a nuclear enabled state. So, does that sort of change the discussions that go on at the global level?
What we have seen is countries fight despite nuclear weapons. So somehow, countries have concluded that at the larger level, all countries which have nuclear weapons are going to exercise caution, exercise restraint, and yet fight wars. We saw India and Pakistan get into a very high tempo war, 4 day, aerial warfare, where India practically hit entire aerial, air defense systems, air bases, everything from Karachi all the way into the POK. We hit all their the military assets. And Pakistan is a nuclear weapon state, which has said that it has a very indicated is a very low threshold, and it talks about using nuclear weapons every other day, right? Yet there was a war. So we have seen this happen. We have seen Iran attack Israel, which is a nuclear power, although not a declared one. But we all know that Israel is and it relentlessly attacked Israel, right? It used hypersonic weapons. We saw all those visuals coming out from Israel, and obviously Israel did attack Iran. And we have seen the war in Ukraine, where Putin has threatened on a few occasions with nuclear weapons. But the war has raged on, and NATO increased its support to Ukraine. First, it supplied a little bit, then you know, Russia kept saying that if you supply this now, that's a red line, and then NATO crossed that red line. Then Russia set a new red line, and that was crossed, and a new red line that was crossed. Right now, we have F-16s in Ukraine, which are supplied by NATO. So wars are being fought and under nuclear overhang, and so the value of nuclear deterrence perhaps is limited to people not lobbing nukes at each other. So, but it's not going to stop wars from happening. Even India, in its statement after Operation Sindoor, we said we are not going to get blackmailed by nuclear weapons anymore. That makes things dangerous as well, because then how another country reacts when it's really pushed to the wall remains to be seen. But it has opened doors, where countries with nuclear weapons are attacking each other, and it makes the situation dangerous. But then you can look at it this way, that people are being restrained in that regard.
Right, right. So, as a last question before we wrap up this episode, what do you think are scenarios in which this defense linkage between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia would backfire for them? Right? Could it expose them to some coordinated diplomatic or economic retaliation from some competitors? Say, does the US change its tack, and does it change its tune and start getting more involved in the region, or does India respond in some other way? Does this weaken their bargaining power in future security negotiations? So, how do you see those scenarios playing out where this backfires for these two countries?
No, this is an important question to address, right? I think the first, in my opinion, Pakistan has painted a target on itself by showing itself. That's the reason perhaps they backtracked on the nuclear umbrella thing, right? Because the Israelis, which are seen as the primary target of this deterrence, they are going to take action to protect their security. And we know how ruthless they are in this regard. So Pakistani nuclear weapons now will be a target of Israel, perhaps covert operations. We'll have to see how they go about it. What do they do to undermine Pakistani nuclear weapons? Similarly, and if Israel is threatened, then the US is going to be on the side of Israel, right? And that will have consequences for these two countries. How India responds? Well, we first don't want the Saudis to fund the Pakistanis. What else are we going to do remains to be seen. Remember, first of all, Operation Sindoor is still on. although it's kind of paused, but it's still on, right? And India is not going to take any kind of action on Pakistani nuclear weapons, but I don't think we're going to stop, say, the Israelis from doing it. And we're not going to be too unhappy if Israel takes any kind of covert action against Pakistan in some form. You have to remember Pakistan does not have a large arsenal, so it cannot extend its nuclear deterrence to all these countries. And if Pakistan then starts to think that it's not enough and ramps up the nuclear weapons, then it's going to be a serious cause of concern for the world. And then the world will respond as well.
Right, right. Great. Thanks, Yusuf, for this comprehensive discussion. It is always great to chat with you. Appreciate all your deep inputs. Any parting thoughts on how do you see this happen? Panning out in the immediate future and maybe over a longer term. Any parting thoughts?
I think it remains to be seen, Arindam. First of all, we need the text out, and perhaps the text not being out shows that they are also mindful of how it will be seen. So they're still working on the nuances of the text. The larger message has been given that there is an agreement. We've already seen a bit of backtracking as far as the nuclear deterrence, extended nuclear deterrence is concerned. And if that goes away, then what's this agreement all about? So we'll have to wait till we have an agreement, the entire text of what this agreement is all about.
Great. Thanks, Yusuf. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy this conversation. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me, man.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.